Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Whether you're returning tonight or just finding this channel for the first time, this is a quiet place to slow down, learn something gentle, and let the day gradually fall away. Tonight, we're going to rest near the edge of the ocean, right where the water slides up the sand, pauses for a moment, and then slips back into the sea. And scattered along that soft, wet line, there are seashells. Some are pale and smooth, rounded by waves until they feel almost like small stones. Some are ridged like little fans, with grooves running from the hinge to the outer edge. Some are broken into curved white pieces that no longer show their full shape. And some are large spiral shells, the kind people often call conch shells, with a deep opening and a curled body that seems to hold the sound of the ocean. At first, seashells can look like beach rocks. They are hard. They are shaped by water. They can be white, pink, brown, orange, grey, or softly striped. But a seashell is not really a rock. It is something life made. Most seashells come from mollusks, a huge group of soft-bodied animals that includes clams, oysters, mussels, scallops, sea snails, conchs, cowries, and many others. These animals do not pick up empty shells and move inside them. They grow their own shells, slowly, layer by layer. A clam shell was once part of a living clam. A scallop shell was once the outer protection of a scallop. A spiral shell was once the home of a sea snail, growing wider as the animal inside grew larger. The shell was not separate from the animal's life. It was shelter, armor, support, and protection all at once. And when the animal died, or when another creature ate it, the hard shell often remained. The soft body disappeared back into the food web of the sea, but the shell could last much longer. It might rest on the sea floor. It might be covered by sand. It might be picked up by a current, rolled by waves, cracked against stones, or carried slowly toward shore. That is why so many beaches are lined with shells. They are not arriving from nowhere. They are the remains of lives that once moved through shallow water, buried themselves in sand, clung to rocks, filtered tiny food from the sea, or crawled along the ocean floor. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you're welcome to subscribe. And if it feels natural, to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find their way to this calm corner of the world, one sleepy traveler at a time. A single shell on the beach may have traveled only a short distance from a nearby sandbar. Another may have been lifted during a storm and carried inland by a strong tide. A small shell fragment may have spent weeks or months being tumbled until its sharp edges turn smooth. On some beaches, the sand itself contains thousands of tiny broken shell pieces. They are so small that they no longer look like shells at all. They have become part of the beach beneath each step. This is one reason the shoreline can feel so full of quiet history. Every shell has already lived through a journey before it is ever noticed by human eyes. It began inside an animal. It grew from minerals. It protected a soft body. It stayed behind after that life was over. Then the ocean moved it, shaped it, and placed it somewhere along the shore. Even the simplest shell holds more than its shape. It holds a trace of seawater, growth, motion, and time. And tonight, as the waves keep breathing in and out along the sand, we can begin with that one small thought. A seashell is not just something found by the ocean. It is something made by the ocean, by life, and by time together. Along the shore, the ocean is always arranging things. It does not place every shell carefully, one by one. It moves them with water, weight, wind, and time. A wave reaches the beach with a thin sheet of moving water. Then it pulls back. That forward rush is called swash. The return flow is called backwash. Together, they act almost like slow hands, lifting small objects, dragging them, dropping them, and lifting them again. A shell that once rested in shallow water may be pushed a few inches during one tide, then a few feet during the next. Then it may disappear under sand for days, weeks, or even years. The beach is not a still place. Even when it looks quiet, grains of sand are shifting. Tiny shell pieces are rolling. Pebbles are settling. Water is choosing what is light enough to move and what is heavy enough to stay. This is why shells often appear in long curved lines along the shore. After a tide falls, it may leave behind a thin band of seaweed, driftwood, pebbles, and shells. This is sometimes called the rack line. It marks the place where the water reached its highest point before slipping back again. Along that line, small shells can gather in clusters. A few inches away, the sand may be nearly empty. The difference can come from the strength of the waves, the angle of the beach, and the size of the objects being moved. A tiny broken shell fragment is easy for water to carry. A thick clam shell or heavy conch shell needs stronger motion, so the beach begins to sort them. Small pieces may wash farther up. Flat shells may slide. Round shells may roll. Heavy shells may settle lower on the beach where the waves still have enough force to move them. On some shores, the sorting is so clear that different bands form. One line may be filled with tiny white shell chips. Another may hold larger clamshells. Another may be mostly dark stones, dried seaweed, and bits of driftwood. The ocean does not sort them by name. It sorts them by weight, shape, size, and how easily each piece catches the moving water. Currents also matter. Along many beaches, waves do not hit the shore straight on. They arrive at an angle. When they do, they push sand and shells sideways along the coast. This slow sideways movement is called longshore drift. It can carry shells from one stretch of beach to another, little by little. A shell found underfoot may not have come from the exact spot where it is found. It may have traveled from a nearby reef, a sandbar, a bay, or a shallow bed where mollusks live just offshore. Storms can change everything quickly. On calm days, the ocean may only bring in small fragments and light pieces. But during strong weather, deeper water is stirred. Waves grow taller. Sandbars shift. Buried shells are uncovered. Shells that rested offshore can be lifted, rolled, and thrown toward the beach all at once. After a storm, people sometimes find shells they had never seen there before. Large whelk shells, thick oyster shells, scallop shells with bright fan-shaped ridges, even pieces of coral or sand dollars, depending on the coast. A storm can act like a sudden deep cleaning of the shallow sea floor. It reaches places that ordinary waves do not reach. Then, when the water calms, it leaves a new layer of ocean material behind. That is why the same beach can look different from one week to the next. One morning, the tide line may be almost bare. Another morning, it may be scattered with hundreds of shells, all shining softly in damp sand. The beach is not only where shells end up. It is where the ocean reveals what has been resting, breaking, and moving beneath the surface. And as those shells gather in smooth pieces, ridged halves, curled spirals, and broken edges, they begin to point back toward the animals that shaped them in the first place. Those smooth pieces, ridged halves, and curled spirals all point back to living animals. Not fish, not plants, not little stones that grew in the sand. Most seashells come from mollusks. A mollusk is a soft-bodied animal, usually without a backbone, and many of them protect themselves by making a shell. There are more than 85,000 known living species of mollusks in the world. Some live in the ocean. Some live in fresh water. Some live on land like garden snails. But the shells that wash onto beaches usually come from ocean mollusks that once lived in sand, mud, reefs, rocks, tide pools, or seagrass beds. A clam is a mollusk. So is an oyster. So is a mussel, a scallop, a sea snail, a whelk, a cowrie, and a conch. They do not all look alike, but they share a soft body plan. Many have a muscular foot that helps them dig, crawl, grip, or hold position. Some have gills that pull oxygen from water. Some filter tiny food particles from the sea. Some graze over rocks. Some hunt other animals slowly across the ocean floor. The shell is the part that lasts. The soft body inside usually does not. This is why the beach gives us shells without the animals that made them. The ocean has already finished that quieter part of the story. One of the easiest shell groups to recognize is the bivalve. The word bivalve means two valves, or two shell halves. Clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops are all bivalves. Their shells open and close like a little hinged door. Near the hinge, a strong elastic band helps the shell open. Inside, powerful muscles pull the two halves shut. In many clams, those muscles are so strong that the shell can close tightly against predators, drying air, or shifting sand. A clam buried under a beach may extend a soft tube called a siphon up through the sand. Through that tube, it draws in water, filters out tiny bits of food, and releases water again. The shell stays mostly hidden below, working like a protected room around the body. A scallop is different. Its shell is often fan-shaped, with ribs spreading outward from the hinge. Some scallops can even swim for short bursts by clapping their two shells together. The sudden closing pushes water out and moves the animal away in quick jerks. That familiar ridged shell is not just pretty. It belonged to an animal that could move, sense light, and react to danger. Then there are gastropods. The word gastropod means stomach foot, because many of these animals move on a broad, soft foot under the body. Sea snails, whelks, cowries, cone snails, and conchs are gastropods. Many gastropods make one shell instead of two. That one shell often curls into a spiral. The animal can pull its soft body back through the opening when danger comes close. Some gastropods also have a small hard plate called an operculum. It works like a trapdoor, sealing the opening after the animal withdraws. A conch shell, with its large spiral body and wide lip, once held a living sea snail. A cowrie shell, smooth and glossy like polished porcelain, once protected a small snail with a narrow opening along the underside. A whelk shell, tall and pointed, once moved slowly over the sea floor as its animals searched for food. The more closely a shell is noticed, the less it feels like an empty object. The hinge of a clam shows where two halves opened. The spiral of a snail shell shows where the body grew. The opening shows where soft tissue reached out into the water. Every curve belonged to a life. And this is the quiet contrast at the center of seashells. The animal inside was soft enough to be torn, dried, crushed, or eaten. Yet around itself, it made something hard enough to survive waves, sand, storms, and time. Softness built armor. And the way it did this begins inside a thin living layer hidden just beneath the shell. Just beneath the shell, pressed close to the soft body of the animal, there is a living layer called the mantle. The mantle is not hard. It is not stone-like. It is soft tissue, part of the animal itself. In a clam, the mantle lines the inside of the two shell halves, like a quiet living sheet. In a sea snail, it sits near the growing edge of the spiral shell, where the newest material is added. In an oyster, it rests against the inner shell surface, shaping the place where smooth nacre may form. This thin tissue is one of the main reasons seashells exist at all. The mantle takes materials from the animal's body and from the surrounding seawater, then releases them in a controlled way. It does not build the shell all at once. It adds to it in layers. A little mineral, a little protein, a little more mineral, a little more organic material to guide the shape. The word organic here simply means material made by living things, such as proteins. Those proteins act almost like a soft framework. They help control where the mineral goes, how the crystals form, and how the shell keeps its shape as it grows. This is why a shell is not just a pile of hardened sea minerals. It is a biological structure. It is built by life with careful timing. At the outer edge of many shells, the mantle adds new material so the shell can become larger. This is how a clamshell widens as the clam grows. It is how a scallop shell extends its fan-like edge. It is how a sea snail shell keeps adding to its opening, slowly making the spiral larger. The oldest part of a spiral shell is usually near the pointed tip. The newest part is near the lip, the wide edge where the animal most recently added material. That means the shell holds a direction of growth. It has a beginning. It has a newer edge. It carries the animal's life outward in its shape. For a bivalve, growth often happens along the outer margin of the shell. The hinge remains near the older part, while the shell spreads wider and thicker over time. This can create curved growth lines across the surface. Some are very fine. Some are raised enough to feel with a fingertip. Each one marks a period when the shell's edge changed, slowed, or continued outward. The mantle also helps repair damage. If a shell is chipped or cracked, and the animal survives, the mantle may cover the injured area from the inside with fresh shell material. It cannot always restore the exact original shape, but it can seal weak spots and make the shell useful again. In this way, the shell is not just something the animal grows once. It is something the animal maintains. A living oyster, clam, or snail is always in relation with its shell, adding, thickening, smoothing, and repairing as conditions change. The process is slow compared with ordinary movement. A wave can cross the beach in seconds. A crab can snap its claw in an instant. But shell growth happens quietly over days, months, and years. Some small marine snails may reach adult size within a year or two. Large clams and oysters can keep adding shell for many years. The ocean quahog, a cold water clam from the North Atlantic, is famous for living for centuries, with some individuals estimated at more than 400 years old. In such animals, the shell becomes a long record of continued building. Layer by layer, the mantle keeps working. This changes the way a shell feels in the imagination. It was not carved by the sea after the animal was gone. The sea may polish it later. The waves may break it later. Sand may round its edges later. But the shell itself began as a living surface. It grew from the animal outward. Soft tissue made the hard edge. A hidden layer shaped the visible form. And once the mantle begins to seem like a quiet builder, the shell's hardness becomes even more remarkable, because that strength depends on the minerals the animal gathers from the water around it. The shell's strength begins with something dissolved in the sea. Seawater may look clear when it folds over the sand, but it carries many invisible ingredients. There is salt, of course. There are tiny traces of metals. There are dissolved gases. And there are calcium and carbonate ions, small charged particles that can join together to make a mineral called calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is one of the great building materials of the natural world. It is found in limestone cliffs. It is found in chalk. It forms much of coral skeletons. It appears in the hard parts of sea urchins, some plankton, and many seashells. When a mollusk builds a shell, it is using this same basic mineral, but not in a rough or random way. It is taking simple ingredients from seawater and food, then turning them into something shaped, layered, and useful. A clam buried in sand is not thinking about chemistry. A sea snail crawling across a rock is not planning the curve of its shell. But inside its body, the mantle is controlling a careful process. Calcium enters the animal from the water around it and from what it eats. Carbonate comes from the chemistry of seawater and from processes inside the animal's body. Then the mantle releases these materials into a very thin space where the shell is being made. In that space, calcium and carbonate join to form solid crystals. A crystal is a material whose tiny parts are arranged in a repeating pattern. Salt crystals, snowflakes, and quartz all have this kind of inner order. In seashells, calcium carbonate can form in different crystal shapes. Two important forms are calcite and aragonite. They are made of the same basic chemical ingredients, but their inner structures are arranged differently. That small difference can change how hard, smooth, shiny, or stable the shell material becomes. Some shells use more calcite. Some use more aragonite. Many use both, placing different materials in different layers. A scallop shell may have a strong outer layer. An oyster may have a rough outer shell and a smoother inner lining. A pearl oyster can build nacre, the glossy material called mother of pearl, from thin aragonite plates stacked in careful layers. The mineral matters, but the mineral alone is not the whole story. If calcium carbonate simply formed by itself in seawater, it would not automatically become a clamshell, a cowrie shell, or the curled body of a conch. The animal uses proteins to guide the process. Proteins are tiny working molecules made by living cells. In shell building, some proteins help decide where crystals begin. Others slow them down, shape them, or hold them in place. They work like a soft pattern that tells the mineral how to grow. This is why shell material can be stronger than it seems. A shell is not only hard because it contains mineral. It is strong because mineral and organic material are arranged together. The result is a natural composite, which means a material made from two or more parts that work better together than alone. A simple comparison is reinforced concrete. Concrete is strong when squeezed, but steel bars inside help it resist pulling and cracking. A shell does something gentler and smaller. Its mineral crystals give hardness. Its proteins add control and flexibility. Together, they help the shell resist waves, sand, pressure, and predators. This is why a thin shell can sometimes feel surprisingly solid in the hand. Its strength is not just thickness. It comes from structure. Layer after layer, crystal after crystal, protein guiding mineral, life organizing the sea into armor. And because every mollusk controls that process in its own way, calcium carbonate does not always become the same shape. In one animal, it becomes a smooth, polished cowrie. In another, it becomes a fan-shaped scallop. In another, it grows into a heavy spiral shell with a wide opening and a thick lip. The ingredients may be similar, but the forms are wonderfully different. The same sea can help build a rounded shell, a ridged shell, and a curled shell, depending on the animal doing the building. The same sea that helps build a shell can also wear it down. After a shell is empty, it enters a different part of its life. It no longer grows. It no longer repairs itself. It is carried, dropped, buried, scraped, lifted, and rolled. A shell that once had a sharp edge may spend days or weeks moving back and forth in shallow water. Each wave pushes it forward. Each pull of water drags it back. Sand rubs against it. Pebbles tap it. Other shell pieces scrape across its surface. Little by little, the crisp details begin to soften. This is why some shells on the beach feel smooth in the hand. They may not have been smooth when the animal was alive. They may have started with ridges, bumps, spines, or a thin, sharp outer lip. But after tumbling in the surf, those raised parts can be worn away. The process is called abrasion. Abrasion simply means wearing something down by rubbing it against other material. It is the same basic process that smooths river stones. It is also the reason sea glass loses its sharp, broken edges. A piece of glass from a bottle may enter the ocean jagged and dangerous. But after months or years of being rolled through sand and waves, it can become rounded, frosted, and soft enough to hold. A seashell can go through a gentler version of that same treatment. Its sharp places are rubbed down first. Then its ridges become lower. Then its color may fade. A bright pink shell may become pale. A brown shell may turn chalky. A glossy surface may become dull and powdery. This happens because the outer layer is being slowly scratched, chipped, and chemically changed by seawater and sunlight. On a high-energy beach, where waves break strongly and the sand is coarse, shells may break quickly. A thin shell might not stay whole for long. It may split into curved pieces, then smaller chips, then grains mixed into the sand. On a calmer beach, especially in a sheltered bay or lagoon, shells may remain whole for longer. They can settle gently into soft mud or fine sand, keeping more of their original shape. This is why two beaches only a few miles apart can have very different shells. One shore may be full of polished fragments. Another may hold delicate whole shells, with tiny ridges still clear along the surface. The shape of the shell also affects how it wears. A flat clamshell may slide and flip as waves pass over it. A rounder piece may roll. A spiral shell may trap air or sand inside its chamber, making it move differently from a thin shell fragment. Heavy shells tend to stay lower on the beach unless a strong wave lifts them. Tiny chips can be carried farther, sometimes forming pale lines where the tide has sorted them by size. When a shell is smoothed by the shore, it becomes a record of two stories. The first story is the animal's life. The shell's original shape came from the mantle, from calcium carbonate, from growth, and from the animal's need for protection. The second story begins after the animal is gone. That story belongs to waves, sand, storms, sunlight, and time. A rounded shell fragment may no longer show which species made it, but it still shows that the ocean has handled it for a while. Its softness of shape is evidence of motion. Its worn edge is evidence of repeated contact. Its pale surface is a sign that the beach has been slowly changing it. So when a smooth shell rests near the tide line, it is not less interesting because its details are gone. It has simply become quieter. The beach has erased some marks and left others. It has turned a once sharp piece of animal armor into something calm, rounded, and easy to hold. But not every shell loses its original form so completely. Some still arrive with ridges, hinges, and fan-shaped lines clear enough to trace with a fingertip. And those familiar grooves lead back to one of the most recognizable seashell shapes of all. Some shells keep their original lines clearly enough to read by touch. A ridged clamshell resting in the sand may look simple at first. Two curved halves, a rounded outer edge, a small hinge area where the shell once opened and closed. But that familiar shape is one of the most successful designs in the sea. Clams, scallops, oysters, and mussels belong to a group called bivalves. The word bivalve means two valves. A valve is one shell half. So a bivalve is an animal with two shell halves joined together, usually by a hinge. The hinge is often near the oldest part of the shell. From that point, the shell grows outward, adding new material along the edge as the animal becomes larger. A clamshell can open slightly to feed and breathe, then close tightly when danger comes near. Inside the shell, strong muscles pull the two halves together. These are called adductor muscles. They are the reason a living clam can shut itself so firmly. In scallops, those same muscles are large and powerful. The round piece of scallop meat eaten by humans is actually the adductor muscle that once opened and closed the shell. On the beach, the soft muscle is gone, but the shell still shows where that life once happened. The ridges across many bivalve shells are not random decoration. They can make the shell stronger. A flat, smooth surface may bend or crack more easily under pressure, but a ridged surface can resist force better. Much like a folded piece of cardboard becomes harder to bend than a flat sheet. This is why corrugated cardboard has waves inside it. The folds add strength without adding too much weight. A scallop shell uses a similar idea in natural form. Its ribs spread outward like a fan from the hinge to the edge. Those raised lines help stiffen the shell and spread pressure across its surface. A predator trying to crush it does not press against a plain, smooth dome. It presses against a shaped structure with ridges, curves, and reinforced lines. Many clam shells also show growth lines. These are different from the larger ribs of a scallop. Growth lines often curve across the shell in bands, marking where the outer edge once rested before the animal added more material. They can be fine and close together. They can be rough and uneven. Sometimes they show pauses in growth caused by cold seasons, changes in food, stress, or burial in sand. In that way, a clamshell can look a little like a tree trunk with rings. Not exactly the same, but similar enough to understand. A tree adds wood around its outside. A clam adds shell along its growing edge. Both can leave behind marks of time. Oysters show another version of this story. Their shells are often rough, uneven, and layered, especially when they grow together in reefs. An oyster reef may contain hundreds or thousands of oysters attached to each other, forming a hard living structure in shallow water. Mussels often grow in crowded clusters too, fastening themselves to rocks, piers, or other shells with strong threads called byssal threads. These threads act like little anchors, holding the mussel in place while waves move around it. So even among bivalves, the shapes vary. A clam may dig into sand. A mussel may cling to stone. An oyster may cement itself in place. A scallop may rest on the seafloor and clap its shell to swim in short bursts. Their shells all use two halves, but each one reflects a different way of living. The ridges, hinges, curves, and growth lines are not just surface details. They are the visible remains of movement, feeding, defense, and time. A shell that seems still in the hand once opened and closed in rhythm with water. It once protected a soft animal from drying air, shifting sand, hungry crabs, and passing fish. The classic clamshell is familiar because beaches give it to us often. But it is only one branch of the seashell world. Not every shell opens like a little door. Some begin at a tiny point and grow by curling around themselves, carrying their history in a spiral. A spiral shell grows in a very different way from a clamshell. It does not open in two halves. It does not close like a hinged door. Instead, it curls around itself, widening as it goes, with the animal living near the opening. Many spiral seashells belong to gastropods. Gastropods are the large group of mollusks that include sea snails, whelks, cowries, cone snails, limpets, and conchs. Some gastropods live in tide pools. Some graze on algae from rocks. Some crawl slowly through sand or mud. Some are predators, moving quietly over the seafloor in search of other mollusks, worms, or small animals. The word gastropod comes from Greek roots that mean stomach foot. It sounds strange at first, but it points to the broad muscular foot many of these animals use to move. A sea snail does not walk with legs. It glides on that soft foot, often leaving a faint track behind it. As it moves, the shell rides above the body like a carried shelter. The spiral itself begins very small. In many sea snails, the earliest shell forms when the animal is still young, sometimes while it is a tiny larva drifting in the plankton. Plankton are small drifting organisms carried by currents. Some are plants, some are animals, some are young stages of larger creatures. As the snail grows, the shell does not simply stretch like skin. It adds new material mainly around the opening, called the aperture. The aperture is the doorway of the shell, the place where the animal's body extends into the water. The mantle adds shell material along this edge. Then the edge becomes wider. The body chamber expands. The spiral grows around a central axis. This is why the pointed tip of many spiral shells is the oldest part. That tip is called the apex. It may look like a small peak or little twisted point at the top of the shell. The newest growth is usually near the outer lip, the broad edge around the opening. So when a person holds a spiral shell, they are holding a shape that has time built into it. The tiny early shell sits near the top. The larger adult shell spreads outward below. A spiral shell is not only beautiful, it is a practical way to grow. The animal can become larger without needing to abandon its shelter. It can keep adding rooms to the same house. The shell expands, but the basic coil remains. Some coils are tall and narrow, like many auger shells. Some are round and heavy, like moon snail shells. Some are long and pointed, like whelks. Some are smooth and glossy, like cowries, whose living animals can extend soft mantle tissue over the outside of the shell and help polish it. Some are dangerous, like cone snail shells, which can be patterned and elegant, while the animal inside uses venom to catch prey. The shell shape often reflects the animal's life. A moon snail has a rounded shell and a large foot that helps it move through sand. A whelk often has a strong spiral shell and may prey on bivalves. A cowrie has a smooth, shiny shell with a long, narrow opening underneath. A conch shell can grow large and heavy, with a flared lip that thickens when the animal matures. Even the direction of coiling has meaning. Most snail shells coil to the right when held with the opening facing the viewer and the tip pointing upward. This is called right-handed or dextral coiling. Left-handed shells do occur, but they are much rarer in many species. That small twist can affect how the animal's body is arranged inside and how it mates with others of its kind. The spiral is not just on the outside. The animal's soft body is shaped to fit inside it. As the shell coils, the body follows that inner curve. Muscles attach to the shell. Organs fit within the chamber. The animal can pull inward when it needs protection. In some sea snails, a small hard plate called an operculum closes the opening like a little door. All of this grows together. Soft body and hard spiral. Living tissue and mineral curve. The shell is not a separate container picked up along the way. It is the animal's own architecture. And among all the spiral shells people notice, one has become especially famous, not just for its size or shape, but for the low rushing sound people imagine inside it. The large spiral shell held to the ear has become one of the most familiar ocean objects in the world. Many people call it a conch shell. The word conch is often used loosely for almost any big spiral seashell, with a deep hollow inside. But true conchs are a more specific group of large sea snails. They belong to a family called Strombidae. The queen conch, found in warm waters of the Caribbean Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Florida Keys, is one of the best-known examples. Its shell can grow more than 12 inches long. It often has a heavy pink or orange inner lip, smooth and wide, like a curved doorway into the shell. When the animal is alive, that shell is not empty at all. A large sea snail fills it. The soft body rests inside the spiral chamber. A strong foot helps it move across sand and seagrass beds. In queen conchs, the animal can push against the seafloor with a hard, claw-like operculum and make short hopping movements instead of gliding like many smaller snails. So the conch shell is not just a beautiful shape. It was once a moving shelter. A heavy, growing body structure carried through shallow tropical water. After the animal is gone, the empty shell becomes hollow. And that hollow space is what gives the conch shell its famous mystery. When someone lifts it to their ear, they often hear a low rushing sound. It seems like waves. It seems like the ocean has somehow stayed inside. But the shell does not store sound from the sea. It does not hold old waves the way a jar might hold water. The sound comes from the air around the listener. A room is never perfectly silent. There may be a faint hum from a fan, a distant car outside, air moving through a vent, blood moving near the ear, a soft shuffle somewhere in the house. Most of these sounds are easy to ignore because they are small and spread out. But when a hollow shell is placed near the ear, its curved inner space changes how those sounds are heard. The shell acts like a resonating chamber. A resonating chamber is a hollow space that strengthens certain sound waves. A guitar body does this. A flute does this. Even a cup held to the ear can do a simpler version of it. The conch shell's spiral chamber reflects and filters the quiet sounds nearby. Some frequencies become louder. Others fade. The result is a soft, steady rush that resembles distant surf. The sound is not identical in every shell. A large shell may create a deeper murmur. A smaller shell may sound thinner. A shell with a wide opening may catch sound differently from one with a narrow opening. Even the shape of the listener's hand and the distance from the ear can change the effect. This is why the sound can feel personal, as if each shell has its own low voice. The curve of the shell matters. Inside a spiral shell, sound does not move through a simple straight tube. It bounces through a chamber shaped by the animal's growth. The walls are hard, smooth in some places, rough in others. The opening narrows and widens. The inner coil changes the path of the air. All of these details help create that familiar ocean-like hush. There is something gentle about knowing the truth behind it. the shell is not carrying a trapped sea. It is changing the quiet that is already there. It takes ordinary background sound and gives it a wave-like shape. It turns a room, a hand, an ear, and a hollow spiral into something that feels coastal. This may be why the conch shell has stayed so powerful in human memory. It is large enough to feel ancient, curved enough to feel mysterious, heavy enough to feel important. And when held to the ear, it seems to bring the shoreline close, even far from water. But the same form that creates that soft rushing sound was never made for human wonder. The wide lip, the deep chamber, the thick walls, and the curled passage all came from the needs of the animal that lived inside. Every part of the shell had a purpose before it became a keepsake. The hollow sound is only what we hear after the living shape has been left behind. Once a shell is seen as a living tool, its shape begins to change. The opening is no longer just an empty space. The hinge is no longer just a small point at the back. The thick edge of a spiral shell is no longer just a pretty rim. Each part once helped a soft animal meet the world outside. In a spiral shell, the opening is called the aperture. It is the doorway where the animal's body reached out. A sea snail extended its muscular foot through that opening to crawl over sand, rock, coral, or mud. It also extended soft sensory parts, such as tentacles, to touch and smell the water around it. Many sea snails have eyes near the base or tips of those tentacles. They do not see the world the way humans do, but they can sense light, shadow, movement, and nearby shapes well enough to help them find food and avoid danger. The aperture had to be large enough for the animal to move and feed, but it could not be too open, because the same doorway that let the animal out could also let predators in. This is why some spiral shells have narrow openings. A cowrie shell, for example, has a long slit-like opening on its underside. The living cowrie can extend its soft body through that narrow space, but the small opening makes it harder for many predators to reach inside. Cone snail shells often have a sleek, narrow opening too. The animal inside may look slow and delicate, but cone snails are predators. Some use venom to catch worms, fish, or other mollusks. Their smooth cone-shaped shells are not just elegant. They protect a hunting animal that lives close to the seafloor. In many larger spiral shells, the outer lip becomes thick when the animal reaches adulthood. The queen conch is a clear example. Young queen conchs have thinner shells. As they mature, the lip flares outward and becomes heavy. That flared lip helps protect the opening and marks the animal's adult stage. It also changes how the shell rests on the seafloor. A thick lip can make the shell harder to break, harder to swallow, and harder to enter. Bivalves solve the problem differently. Instead of one opening, they have two shell halves joined by a hinge. The hinge is a flexible connection near the oldest part of the shell. It allows the two valves to open just enough for feeding and breathing, then close when needed. A clam buried in sand may open slightly and extend siphons, soft tubes that draw water in and out. Inside the shell, gills remove oxygen and filter tiny food particles, such as plankton. Plankton are small drifting organisms in the water, and many bivalves survive by filtering them from the sea. When danger comes, the clam can pull inward and shut its shell. The closing power comes from adductor muscles. These muscles stretch between the two shell halves and pull them together. In many empty bivalve shells, small scars remain on the inside where those muscles were attached. Those marks are quiet fingerprints of the animal's body. They show where living tissue once held the shell shut. Oysters have hinges too, but their shells are often rougher and more irregular because many cement themselves to rocks, reefs, or other oysters. Mussels use byssal threads, strong silky fibers, to anchor themselves to hard surfaces. Scallops, with their fan-shaped shells, can open and close quickly enough to swim in short bursts. The hinge, muscle, and shell shape all work together. They are not decorative parts. They are movement, feeding, and protection made visible. Even the hollow chambers inside spiral shells matter. The animal's body does not fill every old coil in the same way forever. As it grows outward, some older inner spaces may become sealed or strengthened. The shell's inner curve gives room for organs, muscle attachments, and withdrawal from danger. A predator approaching the opening may face a narrow passage, a thick lip, or a hard trapdoor called an operculum in some species. The shell is a small fortress, but one shaped by daily life. It had to open. It had to close. It had to let the animal breathe, feed, move, and sense the water. And once those parts are understood as tools, the stranger features of shells begin to feel less strange. The spikes, ridges, knobs, and sharp edges are not accidents of beauty. They are hints of pressure, danger, and survival written into calcium carbonate. A shell's strange edges begin to make sense when the ocean is no longer imagined as empty. The sea floor is full of contact. Sand shifts. Currents press. Rocks scrape. Predators search. A shell is not simply resting in a calm blue world. It is being pushed, tested, buried, exposed, and sometimes attacked. So the raised ribs on a scallop shell, the knobs on a whelk, and the spines on a murex shell are not just decoration. They are part of the animal's way of living. A ridge can make a shell stronger without making it much heavier. This is a useful design in nature, and it is easy to picture. A flat piece of paper bends easily, but fold that same paper into ridges and it becomes stiffer. Corrugated cardboard works the same way. The wavy middle layer gives strength while keeping the material light. Many shells use curves and ridges in a similar way. A scallop shell, with ribs spreading outward like a fan, can resist pressure better than a plain thin surface of the same size. The ribs help spread force across the shell. They also add stiffness along the direction where the shell is most likely to bend. This matters because many bivalves live where water and sand are always moving. A shell may be pressed under sediment. It may be bumped by stones. It may be gripped by a crab. A little extra strength can be the difference between staying whole and breaking open. Spines add another kind of protection. Some murex shells are covered with long, sharp projections. Murex snails live in many warm and temperate seas, and their shells can look almost like carved sculptures, with points reaching out in several directions. Those spines make the shell wider and harder to swallow. They also make it more awkward for a predator to grip. A crab claw works best when it can get a firm hold. A smooth round shell may be easier to grasp, but a shell covered in knobs or spines creates odd angles. It leaves less room for a clean crush. Some spines may also help the shell settle into soft sand or mud, spreading weight and keeping the animal from sinking too deeply. Other shell shapes help with stability. A snail living on rocks must deal with waves pulling at its body. A low, rounded limpet shell clings tightly to stone, almost like a tiny shield, pressed flat against the surface. Limpets are gastropods too, but many do not have the tall spiral shape people expect from sea snails. Their shells are more like little cones. That low shape helps reduce drag from moving water. It gives waves less to catch. In tide pools, where water rushes in and drains away again, that matters. A shell that sticks up too high can be knocked loose. A shell that hugs the rock can stay in place. In sandy places, other shapes work better. A moon snail has a smooth, rounded shell and a large, soft foot that helps it move through sand. Many clams have shells shaped for digging, with smooth, curved edges that help them slip downward. Some razor clams have long, narrow shells that look very different from the rounded clamshells many people notice on beaches. Their shape helps them burrow quickly into wet sand, sometimes disappearing below the surface in seconds. So shell shape often reflects habitat. Rocks reward low, gripping forms. Sand rewards smooth, digging forms. Predators reward thicker walls, narrow openings, spines, ridges, and hard-to-crush curves. Even strange-looking shells become less strange when seen this way. A shell is the animal's answer to the place it lives. Not a perfect answer, not a guaranteed safety, but a shape refined by many generations of survival. The ocean keeps testing these forms. A shell that is too thin may break. A shell that is too heavy may slow the animal down. A shell that opens too widely may expose too much soft tissue. A shell that is too smooth may be easier to grip. So the shell must balance strength, weight, movement, and protection. That balance gives seashells their variety. A fan, a cone, a spiral, a blade-like razor clam, a spiny murex, a thick-lipped conch. Each shape carries a quiet history of pressure from the world around it. And those pressures did not come only from waves or sand. Many of the strongest shell designs were shaped by living mouths, claws, arms, and teeth trying to get inside. Those mouths, claws, arms, and teeth made seashells more than simple shelters. They became part of a long contest between soft animals trying to stay hidden and hungry animals trying to reach them. On the seafloor, a clamshell may look still, but to a crab, it can be food sealed inside a hard case. Many crabs have claws shaped for crushing. The stone crab, found along warm parts of the western Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico, has a heavy claw that can crack hard-shelled prey. Blue crabs use strong pincers to break smaller clams, oysters, and mussels. A crab may turn a shell in its claws, searching for a weak edge, a thin spot, or an opening. If it can crush the shell, the soft animal inside is exposed. Fish can do this too. Some fish have strong jaws and flat, crushing teeth that work almost like little plates. Pufferfish, triggerfish, and some wrasses can bite through shells, sea urchins, and crustaceans. A shell that is thin or easy to hold becomes a risk. A thicker shell, a rounder shape, or a narrow opening can make the meal harder to get. Octopuses bring a different kind of pressure. An octopus has no bones, so it can press soft arms around a shell and feel for tiny gaps. Its suckers can grip with surprising strength. If the shell belongs to a bivalve, the octopus may try to pull the two halves apart. Some octopuses can also drill into shells. They use a hard beak, a rough tongue-like structure called a radula, and chemicals in their saliva to weaken the shell. The hole may be small and neat, but for the animal inside, it can be the doorway to the end. Predatory snails are patient shell breakers too. Moon snails, which often live in sandy shallows, hunt clams. A moon snail can wrap its large, soft foot around a clam, then drill a round hole through the shell. It uses its radula, which works like a tiny scraping ribbon, along with chemical secretions that soften the calcium carbonate. The result is often a clean circular hole, sometimes found in empty clamshells on the beach. Murex snails also drill into other mollusks. Their shells may be spiny and dramatic, but the animal itself is a slow hunter, using time, chemistry, and scraping to reach another soft body hidden behind shell. These small holes are quiet evidence of the ocean's arms race. An arms race in nature means that one animal's defense improves, and then another animal's attack improves, and the cycle continues across generations. Shells grew thicker, predators grew stronger, openings became narrower, claws became better at crushing, spines made shells harder to swallow. Drilling animals learned to bore through shell walls. Over millions of years, these pressures shaped many of the forms found on beaches. Scientists often describe a major increase in shell crushing and shell drilling predators during the Mesozoic era, the long age between about 252 million and 66 million years ago. This does not mean every shell changed at once. It means that in many seas, predators became more skilled at breaking, drilling, and eating shelled animals. In response, many mollusks evolved stronger defenses, thicker walls, deeper burrowing habits, more complex ridges, smaller openings, harder to grip shapes. The beach still carries traces of that long contest. A scallop rib can be a line of strength. A conch lip can be a shield around the opening. A murex spine can make a shell awkward in a predator's mouth. A clam buried deep in sand can be safer than one resting on the surface. None of these defenses is perfect. The ocean has always had ways in, but each shell shows an attempt to stay whole a little longer. This is what makes seashell beauty so interesting. A shell may look gentle in the sand, pale and polished by waves, but its shape may have been guided by danger. Its ridges, thickness, and narrow passages may be the result of ancient pressure from crabs, fish, octopuses, and other snails. And once shape can be shaped by survival, color begins to feel less like simple decoration too. The stripes, spots, bands, and soft patterns on shells may also carry hints of where the animal lived, how it grew, and how it disappeared into the seafloor around it. The same danger that shaped shell walls also shaped the way many shells disappear into the world around them. A shell may look painted, but its colors are usually built into the shell as it grows. The mantle, that soft tissue layer beneath the shell, does not only lay down minerals, it can also lay down pigments. Pigments are natural coloring materials, made or gathered by living things. They are what give leaves their green, flamingos their pink, and many shells their browns, reds, yellows, purples, and soft creams. In seashells, these pigments may be influenced by the animal's genes, its food, its habitat, and the rhythm of its growth. A shell does not usually receive its whole pattern at once. It forms slowly at the growing edge. As the mantle adds new calcium carbonate, it may release pigment in steady lines, sudden pulses, or repeating patches. If pigment is added continuously, the shell may grow with long stripes. If pigment is released in bursts, the shell may form spots, dashes, or little flame-like marks. If the animal's growth changes with food, season, temperature, or stress, the pattern can change too. This is why some shells look banded. A band may show a period when the mantle was adding more pigment or growing at a different pace. Some cowries have glossy spotted shells that look almost polished by hand. Some cone snails have fine triangles, nets, or zigzags. Some scallops carry pink, orange, brown, cream, or purple tones in soft fan-shaped sections. Some clams are pale and simple, while others show rays, rings, or darker lines across the surface. The pattern is not painted on later. It grows with the shell. In a way, the shell is recording color at the same time it records size. One of the most striking examples is the textile cone snail, which has a shell marked with small, dark triangular shapes over a lighter background. Its pattern can look like woven cloth, which is part of why it has that name. But the animal inside is not decorative or harmless. Cone snails are hunters, and some species use venom to catch prey. The shell's beauty and the animal's danger exist together in the same quiet object. Other shells use color in softer ways. A clam living partly buried in sand may have colors that blend with pale sediment. A snail moving over coral rubble may carry broken patches of brown, white, and tan that make its outline harder to notice. A shell resting among seagrass, algae, rock, and shadow does not need to vanish perfectly. It only needs to be harder to recognize. In nature, even a small delay can matter. A predator that pauses, misses, or looks elsewhere may give the animal time to close, burrow, pull inward, or move away. Not every pattern is camouflage. Some colors may simply be byproducts of how the mantle works. A pigment pathway may turn on and off as the animal grows. A chemical may be present because of diet. A stripe may form because one part of the mantle releases pigment more steadily than another. The shell may appear artistic to human eyes, even if the animal never needed the pattern to be seen. Still, the result can feel beautifully precise. Rows of dots follow the curve of a spiral. Bands wrap around the body of a snail shell. Dark lines trace the growth of a clam. Tiny marks repeat with a rhythm that looks almost planned. The shell becomes a record of movement through time. Not movement across the beach, but movement of growth itself. The mantle adds material. The edge advances. Pigment appears, pauses, returns, and changes. Layer by layer, the animal leaves a colored trace of its own living process. That is why two shells from the same kind of animal can still look different. One may be darker, one may be paler, one may have clearer stripes, one may be worn by waves until the pattern fades. The beach may soften the colors later, but the first pattern began inside the living animal. The outside of a shell can hold stripes, spots, bands, and marks shaped by growth, habitat, and time. Yet some shells save their most surprising beauty for the inner surface, where the plain outer armor opens into a soft glow of layered light. Inside some shells, the surface changes completely. The outside may be rough, chalky, ridged, or dark from life in sand and water. But the inside can glow. It may shine with soft blues, pinks, greens, silvers, and pale gold. This inner glow is called nacre. It is also called mother of pearl. Nacre is found inside pearl oysters, some freshwater mussels, abalones, and several other mollusks. It is not paint. It is not a thin layer of color placed on top. It is a built structure, made from tiny layers stacked with remarkable care. The main mineral in nacre is aragonite, one of the crystal forms of calcium carbonate. This is the same basic shell material used in many other parts of seashells. But in nacre, the aragonite is arranged in very thin flat pieces. These pieces are often described as tiny tablets. Each one is far smaller than a grain of sand. Some are only about half a micrometer thick. A micrometer is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. So these layers are far too small to see clearly with ordinary eyes. Between those hard mineral tablets are thin layers of organic material. That organic material includes proteins and other substances made by the animal. Together, they form a natural stack. Mineral, organic layer, mineral, organic layer, again and again. A simple comparison is a brick wall. The aragonite tablets are like tiny bricks. The softer organic layers are like mortar between them. But this wall is not flat and dry like one built on land. It is grown inside a living animal in seawater, layer by layer, with the mantle guiding the process. This stacked structure is what gives mother of pearl its glow. When light enters nacre, it does not simply bounce off one surface. It passes through many thin layers. Some light reflects from the top layers. Some travels deeper and reflects from lower layers. As those light waves meet again, certain colors become stronger and others become softer. This creates iridescence. Iridescence means the color seems to shift as the angle of light changes. It is the same kind of effect seen in soap bubbles, oil on water, butterfly wings, and some beetle shells. The color is not always coming from pigment. It is coming from structure. The shell is bending light through layers. That is why nacre can seem to change when turned in the hand. A pale surface may flash blue for a moment, then green, then pink, then silver again. The glow feels gentle, but the material is also strong. Nacre is famous because it is much tougher than plain calcium carbonate on its own. A simple crystal can crack in a straight path. Once a fracture begins, it may run quickly through the material. But in nacre, a crack has to work harder. It meets one tiny tablet, then a soft layer, then another tablet. The path becomes twisted and slowed. Instead of racing straight through, the crack must bend, stop, restart, and move around the layers. This helps the shell resist breaking. The softness between the hard pieces gives the structure a little flexibility. Not soft like cloth, not bendable like rubber, but flexible enough to make the whole material harder to split apart. This is part of what makes nacre so fascinating. It is beautiful because of its layers. It is strong because of those layers too. The same design that creates shimmer also helps protect the animal. Inside an abalone shell, nacre can line the inner surface with a smooth rainbow sheen. In pearl oysters, it can form a pale shining layer inside the shell. In freshwater mussels, it can appear white, purple, pink, or silvery depending on the species and the conditions where the animal lived. To human eyes, mother of pearl looks precious. To the mollusk, it is simply useful. It smooths the inner shell. It protects soft tissue from rough edges. It strengthens the place where the body rests against its own hard shelter. And sometimes, when that same nacre begins to form around something inside the animal, the shell-building process turns inward. Layer by layer, the quiet glow gathers around a small beginning, and a pearl starts to form. A pearl begins in the same quiet skill that built the shell. The animal is not trying to make treasure. It is not making something for a necklace, a ring, or a museum case. It is using the same shell-building process it already knows. Layer by layer, mineral by mineral. A soft animal responds to something inside its body. Many people have heard that a pearl begins with a grain of sand. That can happen in stories, but it is not the usual explanation. In natural pearls, the starting point is often something more biological. A tiny parasite, a small piece of damaged tissue, a bit of shell material that shifted into the wrong place. Some small irritation that becomes trapped where the animal's mantle tissue can respond. The mantle is important here again. It is the tissue that makes shell material. When a small piece of mantle tissue becomes involved, it can form what is called a pearl sac. A pearl sac is a tiny living pocket that keeps releasing nacre around the irritation or damaged spot. Nacre is the same mother of pearl material that lines the inside of some shells. It is made from thin layers of aragonite crystals and organic material. The pearl grows because those layers keep building. One smooth coating, then another, then another. The process is slow. A pearl may take months or years to form, depending on the species, the water, and the size of the pearl. In saltwater pearl oysters, cultured pearls are often grown for about 1 to 3 years. In freshwater mussels, some pearls may grow over several years, especially when larger sizes are desired. The animal keeps living while this happens. It filters water. It opens and closes its shell. It rests in currents, farms, reefs, rivers, or lakes. And hidden inside, a round or uneven object slowly gains layer after layer of shine. Natural pearls are rare because the right accident has to happen without human help. The irritation must enter or form in the right place. The animal must survive. The pearl sac must keep coating it. The layers must build in a way that creates a pearl worth noticing. For most of human history, that rarity made pearls extremely valuable. Before cultured pearls became common in the 1900s, Divers searched oyster beds in places like the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, the Gulf of Mannar between India and Sri Lanka, and waters around Japan. Many oysters had to be open to find even one natural pearl. Some pearls were round and smooth. Others were uneven, called baroque pearls. Some were white, cream, silver, pink, gold, blue, green, or dark grey, depending on the mollusk and the nacre. Cultured pearls changed that story. A cultured pearl still grows inside a living mollusk. It is still made from nacre, but humans carefully begin the process. In many saltwater pearl oysters, a trained worker places a small round bead, often made from freshwater mussel shell, into the oyster along with a tiny piece of mantle tissue from another oyster. That mantle tissue helps form the pearl sac. The oyster then coats the bead with nacre. In freshwater mussels, cultured pearls are often started with small pieces of mantle tissue rather than a large bead, which is one reason freshwater pearls can appear in many shapes. The pearl is guided by human hands, but it is not manufactured like plastic or glass. The living animal does the delicate work. It lays down the surface. It creates the glow. It turns a small beginning into something smooth, layered, and luminous. A pearl, then, is not separate from shell science. It is shell making turned inward. Instead of lining the inside of a shell, nacre gathers around a small center. Instead of forming a flat inner surface, it forms a rounded body. The same material that protects the animal becomes something humans call beautiful. That beauty is real, but it is also easy to forget the animal side of it. For the mollusk, nacre is not luxury. It is repair. It is protection. It is a way to smooth, seal, and cover what does not belong. The pearl reminds us that many things people collect from the sea began as survival. A shell, a shine, a pearl, a smooth inner glow. All of them begin with a soft body, trying to stay safe inside a hard world. A pearl shows how easily humans can see beauty and forget the animal. The same is true of seashells. A shell in a glass bowl may look like a calm decoration. A shell on a bathroom shelf may feel like a small memory of summer. A conch shell beside a window may seem like a piece of the beach brought indoors. But before it became any of those things, it was part of a living body. For the animal, the shell was not an ornament. It was shelter. It was armor. It was support. It was the hard boundary between soft tissue and the rest of the ocean. A clam could not simply step out of its shell and choose another one. A scallop did not trade shells when it grew. A sea snail did not find an empty spiral and move in like a hermit crab. In most mollusks, the shell grows with the animal from early life onward. It is built by the mantle, attached to the body, shaped around the body, and used every day. The shell is not clothing. It is closer to a home grown from the skin. A clam shell protects the animal while it lies buried in sand. The clam may sit just below the surface, with only its siphons reaching upward to draw in water. A siphon is a soft tube that helps move water in and out. Through that water, the clam gets oxygen and tiny food particles. If the sand shifts or a predator comes close, the clam can pull inward and close the two shell halves. the home becomes a sealed room. A mussel shell works differently. Many mussels live attached to rocks, docks, pilings, or other shells. They hold themselves in place with byssal threads, strong fibers the animal makes with its own body. The shell helps protect the soft animal while waves tug at the cluster. On a rocky shore, mussels may be exposed to air at low tide, then covered again when the water returns. Their shells help them hold moisture and survive those changing hours. A scalloped shell has another role. It protects, but it also helps the animal move. When a scallop rapidly opens and closes its shell, it pushes water out and can swim in short bursts. The movement is not smooth like a fish. It is more like a series of quick pulses. The two shell halves become part of an escape system. A sea snail's shell is different again. The spiral rides above the soft body, while the animal crawls. When danger appears, the snail can pull inward. Some species close the opening with an operculum, the small hard trapdoor attached to the foot. The shell becomes a private chamber, a narrow entrance, a place to retreat. In rough water, in sand, in seagrass, on reef, or under rock, the shell is always part of how the animal meets its world. It helps against predators, but also against drying out, being buried, being knocked loose, or being damaged by moving grains and stones. The same shell that looks quiet in a dish once faced small daily pressures. A crab claw testing its edge, a fish nosing through the sand, a current turning the animal sideways, a low tide leaving it briefly exposed, a layer of sediment pressing down, a day with less food in the water, a season of colder temperatures that slowed its growth. The shell was not separate from these moments. It carried them. It responded to them. It thickened, widened, repaired, and held. This does not mean humans cannot appreciate shells. People have always noticed their beauty. Their curves, colors, ridges, and shine naturally draw attention. A shell can still be a keepsake. It can still remind someone of walking beside the ocean, hearing gulls, or feeling cool water around their feet. But the deeper truth makes that beauty more complete. The shell was not made for a shelf. It was made for survival. It was a living animal's answer to a moving, hungry, mineral-rich sea. And when that animal is gone, the shell does not immediately lose its place in the world. It becomes empty, but not meaningless. The home remains, and the ocean begins deciding what happens to it now. When the animal inside a shell dies, the ocean does not pause around it. Water keeps moving. Sand keeps shifting. Other animals keep searching for food. The soft body that once filled the shell begins to return to the living sea in other forms. A small crab may pull at it. A fish may feed on it. A sea star, worm, shrimp, or snail may take part. Bacteria begin breaking down what remains into simpler materials. Bacteria are tiny living organisms, too small to see without a microscope. And in the ocean, they help recycle dead matter back into the food web. Nothing is wasted for long. The soft body disappears first because it is made of tissue. It is rich in nutrients. It can be eaten, torn apart, or broken down quickly. The shell remains because it is made mostly of calcium carbonate. It is harder, heavier, and slower to change. So after the living animal is gone, the shell may sit empty on the seafloor like a small abandoned room. It may rest in sand. It may lie in seagrass. It may wedge between rocks. It may be buried so completely that no wave touches it for a long time. What happens next depends on where it is. In calm water, an empty shell can stay whole for years. If it is buried in soft mud or fine sand, it may be protected from strong waves and grinding pebbles. A clam shell sealed under quiet sediment may keep its shape long enough to become part of the fossil record. But in rough water, the story can move faster. A thin shell near a surf zone may be cracked within days or weeks. Waves can lift it, slam it against stones, and drag it through coarse sand. Each impact removes a little more of its original form. A whole shell can become a half shell. A half shell can become a curved piece. A curved piece can become a small chip. A chip can become a pale grain mixed with the beach. Water chemistry matters too. Calcium carbonate can slowly dissolve in seawater, especially when the water is more acidic. Acidic water simply means water, with more free hydrogen ions, which makes it easier for calcium carbonate to break apart. This process is usually slow for larger shells, but it is part of the shell's long return. A shell may break physically. It may dissolve chemically. It may be buried and preserved. Or it may travel toward shore and be found at low tide, still holding enough of its shape to be recognized. Some shells arrive almost whole. A cockle shell may wash up with both halves separated, but still clearly ridged. A scallop shell may keep its fan shape, even after the colors fade. A whelk shell may lose its pointed tip, but still show the spiral body. A conch shell may be worn along the lip, with its once sharp edge rounded by sand. Other shells arrive as fragments so small that their first shape is gone. A white piece may have come from a clam. A pink curve may have come from a conch. A chalky chip may have been part of an oyster reef. The beach may not reveal the species anymore, but it still holds the material. It still holds the result of a life that built calcium carbonate into shelter. There is a quiet patience in this part of the shell's journey. The animal lived inside it. The shell protected it. Then the soft body returned to the food web. The hard shell stayed behind, not alive, but not useless. It became something the ocean could move, wear down, bury, reveal, or reshape. And sometimes, before it breaks into sand or dissolves back into the water, another living creature finds it. The abandoned home can become shelter again, not for the animal that made it, but for another small life moving through the same tide. An empty shell may look abandoned, but in the ocean, empty space is often useful space. A hollow spiral shell lying on the seafloor can become shelter again, not for the animal that built it, for another creature with its own soft body and its own need for protection. The most familiar example is the hermit crab. Hermit crabs are not true crabs, in the same way blue crabs or stone crabs are. Their front half is protected by harder body parts, but their back half is soft, curved, and exposed. That soft abdomen needs cover. So a hermit crab searches for empty gastropod shells, the spiral shells once made by sea snails. it backs into the opening, curls its soft body into the inner chamber, and grips the shell from inside. Then it carries the shell wherever it goes. The old snail shell becomes a moving home. A hermit crab may use a whelk shell, a moon snail shell, a periwinkle shell, or another spiral shell that fits its body. The fit matters. If the shell is too small, the crab cannot pull fully inside. If it is too large, the crab wastes energy dragging extra weight. If the opening is the wrong shape, the crab may not be able to seal itself well. As hermit crabs grow, they must find larger shells. They do not make their own. They depend on the empty homes left behind by mollusks. On some shores, hermit crabs will gather around a newly available shell and inspect it carefully. In certain species, several crabs may even form a kind of waiting line, each one ready to move into a slightly larger shell when another crab moves out. One animal's old protection becomes another animal's upgrade. Shells also become shelter in quieter ways. A small fish may hide beside an empty shell in a tide pool. A worm may settle inside a broken piece. Tiny crustaceans may tuck beneath a shell edge to avoid sunlight, drying air, or predators. Barnacles may attach to the outside. Algae may grow across the surface. A sponge may cover part of it. In warm, shallow water, an old shell can slowly become a small, hard island for other life. This matters because many seafloors are soft. Sand and mud shift easily. For a tiny animal that needs something firm to hold onto, an empty shell can be valuable. A barnacle larva drifting through the water cannot attach to loose sand, but it can attach to a shell. A young oyster may settle on another shell and begin growing there. In oyster reefs, old shells are especially important because new oysters often need hard surfaces to start life. A dead oyster shell can become the foundation for living oysters, and over time, many shells can build a reef that shelters fish, crabs, shrimp, and other small animals. Even a broken shell can help. A half shell can make a tiny roof. A curved fragment can create shade. A pile of shells can leave small spaces where water moves more slowly. Those spaces can protect eggs, larvae, worms, and small crustaceans. In a tide pool, where conditions change every few hours, even a little shelter can matter. At low tide, the water may become warmer, saltier, and lower in oxygen. At high tide, waves may return with fresh water, food, and movement. A shell resting in that pool becomes part of the small landscape. It changes where animals can hide. It changes where algae can attach. It changes how water flows around the rocks. So the shell's usefulness does not end when the first animal dies. It shifts roles. First, it is body structure. Then it may become an empty shelter. Then a surface. Then a hiding place. Then a reef piece. Then a worn fragment. The ocean keeps assigning it new work. This gives the shell a longer life than it seems to have. It may be built by one animal, carried by another, covered by tiny settlers, broken by waves, and still continue to serve the coast. The same spiral that once held a snail may later hold a hermit crab. The same oyster shell that once opened and closed may become the starting place for a new oyster. The same broken piece that seems ordinary on the sand may have sheltered some small creature before the tide lifted it again. And when even that usefulness fades, the shell does not vanish all at once. It breaks smaller, it softens, it joins other fragments, and slowly, the hard remains of ocean life begin to become part of the beach beneath the waves. By the time a shell becomes part of the beach, it may no longer look like a shell at all. It may be a white fleck in the sand, a pale chip near the tide line, a tiny curved grain that once belonged to a clam, a snail, an oyster, or a piece of coral. Many beaches are not made from one kind of material. They are mixtures. Some grains come from rock broken down by rivers, cliffs, wind, and waves. Some come from volcanic material. Some come from coral. Some come from the skeletons of tiny marine animals. And many come from broken shells. A handful of beach sand can hold a quiet mix of mineral history and ocean life. There may be quartz grains from old inland rocks. There may be dark fragments from volcanic stone. There may be pieces of coral skeleton. There may be bits of sea urchin spines, tiny shell chips, and the remains of small organisms that once floated in the water. On some beaches, shell pieces are only a small part of the sand. On others, they make up much of what the beach is. White tropical beaches often contain large amounts of calcium carbonate. That is the same main mineral found in seashells and coral skeletons. In places like the Bahamas, the Florida Keys, parts of the Caribbean, and many coral island beaches, the pale sand often comes from broken marine life rather than from inland rock. Coral reefs grow offshore in warm, shallow water. Waves, storms, grazing fish, boring sponges, and natural breakage slowly turn coral skeletons into fragments. Shells break too. Sea urchins leave hard parts behind. Tiny organisms with calcium carbonate shells sink, break, and mix into the sediment. Over time, all of those remains can become light-colored sand. Some famous white sand is even connected to parrotfish. Parrotfish scrape algae from coral and rock using strong beak-like teeth. As they feed, they bite off bits of calcium carbonate. Their bodies digest the algae and pass the mineral material out as fine pale sand. In some reef systems, parrotfish can produce large amounts of sand over time. So a white beach may contain shell fragments, coral grains, and material processed by living fish. It is not just crushed stone. It is part of a reef's slow recycling. Waves do much of the final shaping. A shell fragment starts with an edge. That edge may be sharp. Then waves push it through sand. Other grains scrape it. Pebbles strike it. The fragment breaks smaller. The smaller piece tumbles more easily. Its corners round off. Its surface becomes dull. Given enough motion, a piece that once clearly showed a shell's curve can become just one pale grain among millions. The size of beach sand usually falls between about 0.06 and 2 millimeters across. Anything smaller becomes silt or clay. Anything larger begins to feel like gravel. That means many grains underfoot are tiny, but not invisible. They are small enough to pour through fingers, yet large enough to sparkle in sunlight when wet. On a shell-rich beach, those grains may be little pieces of former homes. Some beaches make this especially easy to see. A coquina beach is made mostly of small shell fragments. Coquina rock, found in places such as Florida, forms when shell-rich beach material becomes cemented together over time. The word coquina comes from Spanish and refers to small shells. In a coquina deposit, the beach has become stone. Broken shells have been pressed and bound into a new rock layer. That makes the shoreline feel less temporary. The sand beneath a footstep can be part of a cycle that may someday harden, lift, erode, and appear again as a cliff or outcrop. Even ordinary shell sand carries that same idea in a softer form. The beach is not only holding shells, it is partly made from what shells become. The large pieces collect near the tide. The smaller pieces mix into the sand. The finest fragments may wash offshore, dissolve, or settle somewhere quieter. Each grain has been moved by water and shaped by contact. A beach can look simple from far away, just a pale curve between land and sea. But up close, it becomes a resting place for broken shells, coral pieces, mineral grains, and tiny remains of ocean life. The shore is not empty ground. It is a soft layer of history, made from things that once grew, broke, drifted, and returned to the edge of the water. When broken shells become sand and sand becomes buried, the shoreline begins to reach into deep time. A beach may seem temporary, waves change it. Storms reshape it. Footprints disappear before morning. But some shell-rich layers do not vanish. They are buried under more sand, mud, or limey sediment. Over long spans of time, the weight above them presses down. Minerals move through the tiny spaces. Loose pieces can become stone. A shell that once rested in shallow water may eventually become part of a cliff, a quarry wall, a desert outcrop, or even a mountain. This is why fossil shells are found far from modern beaches. They appear in dry places where no ocean is nearby. They appear in limestone blocks used for buildings. They appear in cliffs where waves no longer reach. They appear in mountain ranges raised high above sea level. The shell is no longer lying loose on the sand. It has become a mark inside rock. A fossil is the preserved trace or remains of ancient life. Sometimes the original shell material is still there. Sometimes minerals replace it. Sometimes the shell dissolves away and leaves a hollow mold. Sometimes sediment fills that mold and creates a cast, like a natural copy of the original shape. A fossil clam may still show curved growth lines. A fossil scallop may still show fan-shaped ribs. A fossil snail may still show its spiral. Even after millions of years, the basic form can remain clear enough to recognize. Some fossil shells are young in geological terms, perhaps only a few thousand or a few million years old. Others are vastly older. Mollusks have a fossil record stretching back more than 500 million years, into the Cambrian period, when complex animal life was spreading through the seas. Ammonites, for example, were shelled marine animals related to modern squid and octopuses. Their coiled shells look a little like some spiral seashells, though the animals were very different from sea snails. Ammonites lived in oceans for hundreds of millions of years and disappeared about 66 million years ago. at the same mass extinction that ended the age of non-bird dinosaurs. Their fossils are found in many places, including cliffs, riverbeds, and mountain rocks. In the Himalayas, fossils of ancient marine life can be found high above sea level. That may seem strange at first, but those rocks were once part of an ancient ocean region called the Tethys Sea. When the Indian plate slowly pushed into Asia, the sea floor sediments were squeezed, folded, and lifted into the highest mountain range on Earth. So a fossil shell in a mountain is not a mistake. It is a sign that the land itself has moved. The sea became stone. The stone became height. Limestone tells a similar story. Limestone often forms from calcium carbonate, the same basic mineral found in seashells, coral skeletons, and many tiny marine organisms. In warm, shallow seas, shells, coral pieces, and microscopic remains can pile up on the seafloor. Over time, these layers may be compressed into rock. Some limestone contains large visible shell fragments. Other limestone is made from remains so tiny they cannot be seen without magnification. Either way, much of it began in water, with living things pulling minerals from the sea and leaving hard parts behind. This means the shell story does not stop at the beach. It enters geology. It becomes part of landforms. It becomes part of buildings, monuments, cliffs, and old quarry walls. A person can run a hand over a limestone block and unknowingly touch the remains of ancient marine life. A road cut through a hill may reveal a layer of fossil shells that formed when that place was underwater. A dry desert may hold evidence of reefs, lagoons, and shallow seas that vanished long before humans existed. Fossil shells give shape to lost oceans. They show where water once rested. They show what animals lived there. They show how coastlines shifted, how continents moved, and how time can carry the sea into stone. And once humans began noticing those shapes, collecting them, carving them, trading them, and wondering about them, shells entered another kind of history as well. Once humans began noticing shells, they did more than admire them. They picked them up. They carried them. They drilled holes through them. They wore them against the skin. They placed them in graves, homes, temples, markets, pockets, and memory boxes. A shell was small enough to hold, but strange enough to feel special. It came from the sea. It had color, shine, shape, and pattern. It could survive long after the soft animal was gone. So across many parts of the world, shells became useful, beautiful, and meaningful. Some of the oldest known shell beads are tens of thousands of years old. In parts of Africa and the Middle East, small snail shells with drilled holes have been found at ancient sites, showing that early humans used shells as personal ornaments long before cities, writing, or metal tools. A bead made from shell could be worn as decoration, but it could also show identity, trade, belonging, or care. Someone had to collect it. Someone had to pierce it. Someone had to string it. Even a tiny shell bead carried human effort. Shells also became tools. Sharp shell edges could scrape, cut, or carve. Large clam shells could be used like scoops. Some coastal peoples used shells as fish hooks, blades, containers, or parts of farming tools. Before plastic, steel, and glass were common everywhere. A strong shell, was a ready-made material. It was curved. It was hard. It was already shaped by nature. A shell could become a spoon, a cup, a scraper, or a small working edge. Mother of pearl became especially valued because of its glow. The inner nacre of some shells was carved into buttons, inlays, handles, jewelry, and decorative panels. In the 1800s and early 1900s, mother-of-pearl buttons were widely used on clothing. Freshwater mussel shells from rivers in North America were cut into button blanks, polished, and sewn onto shirts, dresses, and coats. A quiet river shell could end up fastened to a sleeve or collar, carrying a little of that pearly light into daily life. Cowrie shells became one of the most famous shell currencies in history. Cowries are small, smooth, glossy shells, usually with a narrow slit underneath. Their size, strength, shine, and natural shape made them easy to count, carry, and recognize. For centuries, cowries were used as money in parts of Africa, South Asia, East Asia, and across Indian Ocean trade routes. In some regions of West Africa, cowrie shells were used in markets for everyday exchange. In parts of China, early writing even connected shell forms with ideas of money and value. A shell that began in warm tropical water could travel through trade and become part of human economies far from the shore. Large shells became instruments too. A conch shell can be turned into a trumpet by cutting or opening the tip and blowing through it. The hollow spiral then acts as a resonating chamber, strengthening the sound. Conch trumpets have been used in the Pacific Islands, India, Tibet, the Caribbean, Mesoamerica, and other coastal cultures. Their sound can be deep, rough, and carrying. It can mark ceremony, warning, prayer, arrival, or gathering. In Hindu tradition, the shankar, a sacred conch shell, is used in rituals and is linked with purity and divine sound. In Tibetan Buddhist practice, conch shells have also been used as ceremonial instruments. A shell that once housed a sea snail became a human voice across open air. Shells also became symbols. They could stand for birth, protection, travel, beauty, wealth, pilgrimage, or the sea itself. The scallop shell became linked with pilgrimage routes to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, where travelers carried or wore the shell as a sign of the journey. For others, a shell simply became a keepsake, a small object brought home from a beach, a reminder of a morning tide, a family trip, a warm place, or a walk beside water. Humans have always found ways to give shells meaning, but beneath the jewelry, the money, the trumpet, the button, and the souvenir, the first meaning remains older. Each shell began as part of a living animal. Before human hands held it, traded it, carved it, or placed it on a shelf, it was made slowly in the sea. That memory gives the shell its deepest quietness. A shell can begin as something very small in the hand, a pale curve in the sand, a ridged fan near the tide line, a spiral with a hollow chamber, and a worn outer lip. At first, it may seem simple. Just a beach object, just a keepsake, just something the water left behind. But now, that same shell carries more. It is not only a shape, it is a record. It began with a soft animal, often a mollusk. building around itself for protection. A clam, scallop, oyster, mussel, whelk, cowrie, cone snail, or conch. Each one using its mantle, that thin living tissue, to lay down minerals and proteins in careful layers. The shell was not carved by waves. The waves may have polished it later. The sand may have rounded it later. But the first shell was built by life. Calcium from seawater. Carbonate from ocean chemistry. Proteins from the animal's own body. Layer by layer, a soft creature shaped a hard shelter around itself. That is one of the quiet wonders of seashells. They are ocean chemistry made personal. The same basic mineral found in limestone, coral, and chalk became a clamshell, a scallop fan, a glossy cowrie, or a heavy spiral conch. The same sea offered the ingredients, but each animal gave them form. A smooth shell on the beach may show the ocean's afterwork, rolled and softened by sand. A ridged shell may still show the animal's growth. A spiral shell may still point from its oldest tip to its newest outer lip. A shell with spines may remember the pressure of predators. A pearl may show the animal's shell building turned inward, coating a small irritation with nacre until it glows. And if sleep carried part of the journey away, the simple truth is this. Seashells come from living animals, mostly mollusks. They are built by the mantle, using calcium carbonate from seawater and food. Their shapes are not random. A clamshell opens and closes with a hinge. A scallop shell has ribs that help strengthen it. A snail shell grows in a spiral by adding new material around the opening. A conch shell does not hold the sea inside it, but it can make surrounding sounds resonate until they resemble waves. Smooth shells are often worn down by sand, water, and time. Broken shells can become part of the beach itself. And long after the animal is gone, shells may become shelter for hermit crabs, surfaces for barnacles, grains of white sand, fossils in stone, tools, money, jewelry, instruments, or quiet human memories. That is what has been resting inside this small subject all along. Biology, chemistry, growth, defense, erosion, history, and time. A seashell can be many things at once. To the animal, it was shelter. To a hermit crab, it may become a borrowed home. To the beach, it may become sand. To stone, it may become a fossil. To humans, it may become a button, a bead, a trumpet, a symbol, or a small object kept because it carries the feeling of the shore. The shell does not need to choose one meaning. It holds them together. It is biology because it was grown by a living body. It is geology because it can become sediment, limestone, or fossil. It is history because humans have carried shells for tens of thousands of years. It is decoration because its colors, curves, ridges, and shine invite attention. And it is a reminder of the sea, because even when it is far from water, it still seems to belong to the tide. The shell from the beginning can now rest in the imagination a little differently, not as something empty, not as something simple, but as a small record of a life that once moved through water. It may have filtered plankton from the sea. It may have crawled across sand. It may have clung to rock while waves passed over it. It may have hidden from crabs, fish, octopuses, or drilling snails. It may have grown through warm seasons and slow seasons, adding a little more shell along the edge. Then, after the animal was gone, the shell entered the wider work of the shore. It was carried. It was buried. It was uncovered. It was polished. It may have sheltered another creature. It may have broken into fragments. It may have joined the sand beneath the moving water. There is peace in that cycle. Nothing in it is rushed. The shell grows slowly. The ocean moves it slowly. The beach wears it slowly. Stone preserves it slowly. Human hands notice it for a moment, then place it somewhere safe. And beyond that, the tide continues. Water rises and falls. Sand shifts by tiny measures. Shell fragments turn in the wash. Far offshore, living mollusks keep building new shells in the dim blue water. Soft bodies making hard homes. Small lives shaping minerals into curves. The ocean keeps working quietly, the way it has for hundreds of millions of years. And somewhere along the edge of the beach, a shell rests in the sand, holding the memory of life, water, and time in one calm shape.